Well, today we are continuing a series of conversations around this idea of a fresh start. And last week we kicked off this series and we said that a fresh start is not simply trying harder, it's not a do-over, it is a complete shift. In fact, we defined it like this. We said that a fresh start is when you start something again in a completely new and different way after being unsuccessal. And today we're going to dive right back into that conversation, but we are going to look at specifically what a fresh start looks like when it comes to faith. And I really think that today is the perfect day to have a discussion right now in this time around a fresh start with faith, because there's so much going on. There's so many questions that people have about God and faith. There's so much unknown with the future. I mean, think about the church. The church looked radically different just 6 months ago than it does today. And people have, what does my faith look like when the church looks so different today? And so today is the perfect time to have this discussion. But we wanted to try something a little bit different. And so instead of you hearing from our lead pastor, Buck, the entire time, we turned the tables and we put Buck here in the hot seat. Buck, you're here sitting with us. We're going to have a conversation about faith, fresh start. But first, how are you doing?
Well, thanks for asking, Jeremy. I feel pretty good right now. And this is kind of fun. The roles reversed, because I remember the day way back when in a mentoring relationship when we were just hanging out. And
yes.
I was asking all the questions. And
I remember.
Talking about life and talking about God and talking about girls. And
Just one girl.
Oh, that's right. Ashley, shout out to Ashley.
Yeah, just Ashley.
That's right.
Yeah.
But, I remember back then and, just those conversations were great. And to think, the roles are being reversed now is a lot of fun. And something else I remember back then is, as I noticed, you just got a haircut.
Yep.
And, but back then your hair looked a lot different. In fact, you looked a little bit like Justin Bieber. And I know you're going to kill me for this, but guys, I've got a picture of Jeremy and his Justin Bieber kind of look-alike, doppelganger kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of fun back then.
Yeah, Buck, thinking about, I learned from my mistakes. Like, I had that hair in middle school and high school, and then I grew up, and then I changed my hairstyle. You have had your hair since middle school, high school?
Well, it's, my 8th grade year, so closer to high school, just to clarify.
I'm sorry, yes, just to clarify.
Yeah, but the reason, it was a 90210 inspired. Remember Dylan on 90210?
I don't remember, but sure, I'll take your word for it.
I know. So he had spiky hair, but what I'm thinking is old things become new things, and it keeps going, this cyclical thing.
Yep.
And so I just keep, my hairstyle goes in and out and in and out. So I just hold on to it.
Yeah, and it's pretty long right now.
It is very long.
I remember thinking back to when we first met, 2009, North Point just started. I came to North Point to church with my family. I didn't grow up in church, and came with my parents, and I actually had a lot of questions about faith back then. And I remember seeing you up on stage and thinking to myself, man, if anybody's got the answers to those questions, it's that guy.
Oh, dear.
And so I went home, over that weekend, and I typed up a novel of questions about everything I didn't understand or know about faith. And I sent you that email, and tell me about, receiving that. Or
I'm still looking for it. I think it's in my junk, folder or something.
Sure.
But here's the deal.
Sure.
God is so big that he can handle those kind of situations, and here you are today.
Well, luckily, God put Ashley in my life, and I stuck around at church because of a girl, not because of answers to faith. All that stuff came a little bit later.
Wow. Thank God for Ashley.
But I would say, just in all seriousness, being on the other side of you, I would say to everybody who's watching, you are the perfect person to have a conversation with about faith. Because I think a lot of people sit where I am sitting. People, they want to send you emails. They want to meet with you. They want to ask you questions about life and faith and God. And that's what you get all the time. And in my 10 years, for me personally, on the other side of you, I can honestly say I've learned more about faith from you than any other person on the planet. And watching you lead North Point, I've come from a student to being in college and then being on staff, and my role has changed, and I've seen you in a lot of different ways behind the scenes. Watching you lead North Point, watching you lead your family, going through all of the life struggles that have come your way, your mom passing away in those first couple of years of North Point, and then just a roller coaster ride that you've been on leading North Point behind the scenes. I can honestly say to everybody watching that you are one of the most faithful men that I've ever met. And
Goodness.
I just want to say thank you for that. And also just thank you on behalf of all of North Point for your faithfulness as our pastor. Yeah. We are so incredibly grateful for you.
You are over the top, my friend. I feel like I should give you a hug right now after all that.
Well, I'm an introvert, and so normally I'm a huge hugger, but social distancing, I think, rain check.
Just perfect timing, that works, huh?
Yeah. But when it comes to faith, there's a lot of confusion around this topic, right? Think about what's just happening in our world today. I mean, you open up the news and, people have questions about God and things that are unknown. Not only that, but even pre-COVID, people have potentially had experiences with a pastor or a church where they had a question, they wanted something answered, and their answer or the version of the answer they got gave them more a doubt than it did actually helping them. I think about being at UT. I went to UT and relatively recently, and being around on campus, just the culture down there, it's very post-Christian, modern society, modern culture, and it just feels like faith is irrelevant. Like it's not significant, it's not important, it's just kind of an old way of thinking. And so there's a lot of confusion around faith. Can you unpack kind of the big reasons as to why we see all of this confusion today?
Well, I definitely would agree. I think there is a lot of confusion around faith, and there has been for many, many years. I think right now it's amplified with everything going on.
Right.
And I think honestly, perhaps one of the reasons why it is so confusing, there's a lot of things we could talk about, is because of what I would call circumstantial faith. And I keep bumping into this over and over and over. And circumstantial faith is that idea that, when circumstances are bad or circumstances are unexplainable or tragedies come our way, maybe we lose a job or lose a loved one or, something with finances or what have you. And when an unexplainable circumstance or hard circumstance doesn't line up with my faith, doesn't line up with what I've been taught about God, what I've read about God, what I've heard about God, his character, his promises, that can create an enormous amount of confusion. In fact, several months ago, I was meeting with this couple, and we were just talking about life, and they were sharing some really difficult things that were going on. And we spent the majority of the conversation just unpacking those, because that was real life. That's being a human. How do you process? They were talking about physical hardships, and they just lost their business, and financial hardships. And so I was just asking them a lot of questions about how are you processing that? And we worked through a lot of those things. And towards the end of the conversation, they said, Buck, our question for you, though, is in all of this, is how do we still believe in God? Because they said, we don't think we believe in God. And when I asked them why, they said, the reason we don't believe in God is because, if God loved us, if God was for us, then why would all these things happen? And I think that's a fair question, but that conversation shifted to the circumstantial faith. To go, when we lean our faith against, circumstances, or the foundation of our faith is what's happening around us, I'm just telling you, that leads to very, very fragile and confusing faith.
Right. So circumstantial faith, God loves me when things are good. I believe in God. I love God when things are good.
Right.
And then when things are bad, where'd God go? God is bad. I don't believe in God anymore. God doesn't love me. I can see how that could lead to a fragile faith.
Sure.
With little foundation. Can you unpack that a little bit more, though? What does that fragility look like, when it comes to going forward with our faith then?
Yeah, I think the thing that makes it so fragile is for you and I think all of us, we're just terrible at interpreting, circumstances like these tragedies and hardships and difficulties. We try to connect the dots, and oftentimes I think to myself, we are finite beings with a very limited perspective. And we continue to try to project these circumstances on God and go, hey, this is what's happening, or this is why God, or here's how all the dots connect. And I'm just telling you, we're terrible at it, and it creates a lot of confusion. And it really reminds me of my boys and something that happens with, my kiddos, especially when they were small. And so I think about, my son, Sam, he's now, 17, almost 18. But when he was a little boy, I think 3 or 4 years old, I'd take him to the doctor, and the doctor would say, hey, he needs to get a shot. And as soon as Sam heard that, he would look at me and be like, no, Dad, I'll never,
terrified.
Yeah, he's freaking out. And then I would look at the doctor and I'd say, go ahead and give it to him, and the nurse would come in or what have you. And as he was getting the shot, he would look at me with these crocodile tears and this expression like, Dad, you don't love me. Dad, you're not for me. And if we could freeze that moment, in that moment, I think Sam would walk away. Sam would just say, hey, I'm done with my dad, because it's clear he doesn't love me. But the problem is he just had a very limited perspective, because the truth is I couldn't love him anymore. The truth is I was 100% for him, and that's why I was allowing the pain of the shot, because I love him. And I think that's from, my kids to me, which, I've got 20 years or 25 years on my kids. But I think we do the same thing with God. But yet God has infinite years on us. And we simply do not know what God is up to. And oftentimes when we try to, interpret these circumstances, connect the dots, I just think that can lead to a lot of confusion and really make faith extraordinarily fragile.
Yeah, that's a great way to illustrate it. When it comes to the church, what role has the church played in circumstantial faith in this whole idea?
Yeah, I think the church has done some great things. I mean, around the world, when it comes to hospitals, when it comes to the hungry, when it comes to the poor, I think just when it comes to meeting people in everyday life and giving us strength and hope and meeting people in times of grief, I mean, the church is awesome. But I think over the last, 50 to 70 years, there's been this shift in the church to begin to sign God's name to promises he's never made. And say, hey, this is going to be your best life ever, and you're going to have the greatest marriage if you just have enough faith, and you're going to have all this finances, and you're going to get the cars, and you're going to get the vacation, and you're going to have this greatest looks, and your kids are going to get into the schools that they want. I mean, just have faith. And honestly, I just think that's led to an enormous amount of confusion because that's not what God promised. I mean, what God promised through his son, Jesus Christ, is Jesus said, hey, in this world, it's a broken world. You're going to have trouble. There's going to be difficulties. But then he goes on to promise, he says, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Like, I'm right here with you. My grace is sufficient. And then Jesus goes on to even teach us that this world is not our home. I think another thing that leads to confusion is we think that this world is our home. In terms of like, this is heaven, this is utopia, it should be perfect. But Jesus over and over and over teaches us, no, your home is in eternity, your home is to come. Right. And that's why he says, hey, don't store up for yourself treasure on earth, store up for yourself treasure in heaven, because that's your home to come. In fact, I think one of the greatest passages that captures this is found in Hebrews 13:14, and it's so clear. It says, for this world is not our permanent home. We're looking forward to a home yet to come.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I know for me, I had a phone conversation this week with a friend, and I called them and said, hey, how are you doing? And they said, oh, doing good. But honestly, like, I'm a little freaked out. I'm a little scared. I'm a little nervous about what's going on in the world and in the news and just all the unknowns. And this is a person that I would consider to have, really, really strong faith. They've been a follower of Christ for a really long time. And they said that to me, and I just thought, man, there's that thing, there's that circumstantial faith thing. And they were wrestling with, I'm trying to trust God in this moment as I see circumstances around me. That's so real and so true. And faith can get so confusing there. The other area that I see personally where faith gets confusing is when our behavior kind of bumps into our belief. Like, we go through life and then all of a sudden we face a moral choice, and it kind of contradicts a belief system that we've grown up with, or a set of behaviors within that belief system. And so we're left with this choice of, what do we do in that moment? Do we let go of our belief, or do we behave this way, and what do we do? I had a small group leader in high school who had a huge influence on my life, and I learned a lot of things from him. And he always described it like this, that we tend to put up a smoke screen with faith, and we say, I'm going to believe what I want to believe so I can do what I want to do.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
I love, and I think that's 100% true. I see that, all the time. In fact, I think about perhaps the most honest conversation I've had about faith was several years ago, where I was talking to this guy, and we were eating breakfast tacos, and we were having a very intellectual conversation because he had lots of questions about God and about doctrine and about the Bible and about, why would God allow these things? And it's a great conversation. So we spent about 2 hours. And at the end of this conversation, I looked at him and I just said, so what's holding you back from putting your faith and trust in Jesus Christ at this point? And he looked at me, and it was such an honest moment because he paused and he thought about it, and he said, gosh, Buck, I guess I just want to do what I want to do. And I thought, there it is.
That's so honest.
Yeah, it is. And I just think, speaking of honesty, I think an honest question we should ask ourselves in faith, and especially if we're considering walking away from faith because behavior, is to ask ourselves, what changed first? Was it our behavior that changed first, or was it our belief? In other words, did we uncover some evidence? And I'm not talking about like one strand of evidence. Hey, I listened to this one podcast. I'm talking about like we did exhaustive research, it uncovered evidence that led us to walk away from our belief. Did that happen? Or is it really what happened first is my behavior changed? And because I now want to do what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and change my belief and even walk away from my belief because I want to behave the way I want to behave. And I just think that's an honest question to ask ourselves.
Yeah, and that requires us to get very objective when we ask those types of questions, right?
Yeah.
So you think about, confusion with faith when it comes to circumstances, when it comes to our morality. When we take a step back, we get objective, we ask those types of questions, then we turn and look at faith, and we automatically go, okay, well then what is faith? Like,
Right.
How would you define it? How would you unpack it?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about fresh start with faith. I think that's an important question.
Right.
What's faith? And I think to answer that, you've got to define what faith is and what faith is not. And faith is not a power or a force somehow that you tap into to change outcomes. That you get a bunch of people on social media to, get faith with you, and now we're going to change this outcome. I get that, but that's not faith. That's much more like magic. And faith is not a formula. It's not this idea, if I pray and if I say these words and if I give money to the poor and read my Bible, all of a sudden, I can tap into faith. And faith is certainly not a feeling. And I think that's important because people have come up to me and they've said, hey, Buck, I wish I had what you had. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, that feeling that you believe God's real and all that. I just wish I had that. And I'm like, I don't think I have that. I think it's based on the evidence. And faith is not a feeling. And so the question is, what is faith? And I think the greatest definition of faith really is found in the letter of Hebrews. And the letter of Hebrews is all about faith. It's the author's writing it to a group of people who are wanting to walk away from their faith because they're feeling these circumstances. They're having all kinds of hardships and persecution. And the author of Hebrews says, you don't have to walk away from your faith. And in this letter, he gives a great definition. Hebrews 11:1, here's what he says. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. I love that definition of faith because I think it captures it right there. And it really illustrates the fact that we all have hope. I mean, we hope to get the job. We hope she dates me. I hope he dates me. I hope to get into school. Whatever that is, we all have hope. But the question becomes, how do we have confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see? And what gives us the confidence is really the object of our faith. In fact, to kind of illustrate that, imagine this, and this would be a good scenario for you. Imagine if I walked in your office and I said, hey, Jeremy, you got a big raise.
Fantastic. That sounds great.
I think you'd go like it's about time, And so what you would do is you would go home and you'd say to Ashley, Buck came in, I'm getting a raise. And knowing you, because you're fairly analytical, you'd pull out your spreadsheets and all your formulas and start plugging the numbers in. And
then I'd say, we're going to the beach. Here we go.
Exactly, yeah. And so, and the reason why is because you have confidence and assurance that what I said, I'm actually going to do. But imagine this. Imagine if I came into your office like 100 times previous to that moment, and I said, you're going to get a raise, but you didn't get a raise. You're going to get a raise, but you didn't get a raise. You're going to get a raise, but you didn't get a raise. When I came into your office this time and said, hey, you're getting a raise, Jeremy, you would have zero confidence and zero assurance. And the reason why is because the object of your faith. And that's important. And here's the deal. Well, the author of Hebrews is talking about this hope that we have. And the hope isn't in like pay raises and all this kind of stuff. The hope he's talking about in Hebrews is really the hope that God is, that God loves us, that God is for us, that we are forgiven, that God is working for the good in these hard, difficult situations, that our eternity is secure with God and we will see our loved ones again. I mean, that's the kind of hope he's talking about that provides meaning and purpose. But what gives us confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see is the object of our faith.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense then when it comes to circumstantial faith, when we base our faith on external circumstances, how that lets us down every single time we live in this broken world. That's the object of our faith. Like that doesn't reconcile very well. What then, when it comes to Christianity, do we shift our confidence to? If it's not our external circumstances, it's not, what's going on around us, what then, what does confidence look like?
Right. Well, I think the author of Hebrews anticipated that question because he actually answers it in what he says next. So it continues and it says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. I love the way he says that. The author and perfecter of our faith. And then he gives us why we can fix our eyes on Jesus. He says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. In other words, the reason why we can put our hope and confidence in Jesus Christ is look at his life. Like he lived the perfect life. He died on the cross for your sin, for my sin. And then he ascended to the right hand of God. He did all of that to punctuate the fact that he loves you, that he loves us, and that he's 100% for us. And when we fix our eyes on Jesus, that's what gives us this confidence and assurance. But I'm telling you, anytime we waver, anytime we begin to go, well, circumstance, and I'm looking over here and we take our eyes off Jesus Christ, it leads to confusion. It leads to questions, does God love me? Is God for me? And we get into all this and that makes it, again, so incredibly fragile.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people tuning in and watching right now, and probably a lot of different areas of faith and where they're at, and if they've been a Christian for a long time or maybe not at all. Some people perhaps are looking to have a fresh start when it comes to faith, and it's the first time. It's a brand new beginning for them.
Right.
For others, perhaps a fresh start is I'm walking back to faith. I walked away a while ago and I'm walking back. Maybe people just feel stagnant or stale because we're not in the building right now, and that was kind of our rhythm before and our relationship with God. What would you say to people in light of all this? Like, what does a fresh start with faith then mean? What does it look like?
Right. I love the way you ask that, because I do think, in the spectrum of faith, we're all at different places. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I really would go back to the person of Jesus. And I would simply say a fresh start with faith begins and ends with the person of Jesus Christ, period. Nothing outside, begins and ends with Jesus. And I think if you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you hear that and you're like, yeah, that's where my faith is, and okay, Buck, but what about? I think you've got to be careful with that, because that may be a telltale sign that you need to bring your eyes back on Jesus, because you're so quick to say, what else? There is nothing else. It is the person of Jesus Christ. And I think one of the greatest catalytic questions we could ask ourselves to begin to genuinely experience a fresh start with faith is, what is my faith resting on? Is your faith resting on, a circumstance? And I think you've got to be honest with this and just go, is my faith going, what? If my job is good, if my health is good, if, finances are good, my faith is resting on my 401k, my retirement, my faith is resting on my marriage, my faith is resting on the future of my kids. Whatever that is, I think we've just got to be brutally honest with it and get to the bottom of what our faith is in. And if it's in anything outside the person of Jesus Christ, I'm just telling you, it's going to lead to a lot of confusion, and it will lead to a fragile faith. And eventually, because the pressures of life and, all the pleasure that life, entices us with, odds are we're going to walk away from our faith. But here's the deal. When we fix our eyes on Jesus and we say it's 100% him, that's why I have confidence, that's why I have assurance, it really does lead to that. It leads to confidence to know I'm forgiven. It leads to confidence to go, God, I know you're working in the midst of these hard situations and unexplainable circumstances. It leads to the fact to go, I know my eternity is secure and I will see my loved ones again. And it even leads to the fact to go I have confidence that when I'm looking in this world and seeing all this hardship and difficulty, that we're seeing today, that God still loves us, that God is still right here and God is still good, because my faith is not in all these things here. It's in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so helpful. I'll never forget when I was in high school and I had this buddy, and we were hanging out one day. We were on the wrestling team together, and it was wrestling period, and so we weren't really doing anything. It was off season, so we were just kind of hanging out. And I remember that day so clearly, because that night I got news that he had passed away.
I remember that.
And what's just interesting is that, this buddy of mine, he was actually the son of my small group leader that I mentioned earlier before. His name, my small group leader's name was Jeff. And when this happened, I remember, being on the other side of Jeff and his family and watching them mourn and grieve. And I was going through my own process, but that's the most unimaginably painful thing you could possibly go through. And watching them go through that, I just imagined, I was on the other side just going I want to give him space. I don't expect anything from him. And so we had small group during that time, and he wasn't there, obviously, and completely understandably so. But then 4 to 6 weeks later, Jeff shows up and we have a small group session together. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I said this out loud, but I just remember thinking, Jeff, why are you here? You should be with your family. You don't need, we're fine. We're going to be okay. You don't need to do this right now. And I just remember how he unpacked him being there was, he just said that his faith, even through what he was going through and how painful it was, and he was still right in the thick of it. Even though that was happening, his faith never rested on anything other than the person of Jesus.
Right.
You know, it wasn't on what was going on in his life and his external circumstances. His faith was on the person of Jesus, and that was the thing that drove him, and that's why he was there in that moment. And it was one of the most unforgettable experiences being on the other side of him and hearing that. I'll always remember that for my entire life. It was amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I know Jeff as well, and I just can't imagine all the emotions and all the questions. But you're absolutely right. When I had personal conversations with Jeff, it was very clear that the object of his faith was the person of Jesus Christ, and he just didn't take his eyes off him.
Yeah.
And so honestly, I just think when it comes to a fresh start with faith, one of the greatest questions we could ask is, what is our faith leaning against? What have we rested our faith on? What's the foundation of our faith? And when it's the person of Jesus Christ, I think that's where fresh start begins with faith.
Yeah. Well, Buck, thank you so much. You're the lead pastor, so you kind of have to be here. But thank you anyways for having a convo about faith. This was really helpful for me. I hope it was helpful for many of you watching. And to wrap up, I want to end with two quick things. One, I know, again, we're all at different places when it comes to faith. And some of you perhaps still have big questions, and you're saying to yourself, man, one conversation is not going to do it for me, and that's totally understandable. Or perhaps some of you are going, man, I do believe those things, but I want to take more steps. I want to grow deeper in my faith. If you find yourself in either of those categories, then what I would encourage you to do is this week, make sure to tune in to Overtime. It's going to be out on social media. It's going to be just a continued conversation of things that we would love to talk about, but we didn't quite have the chance or the time to talk about today. So make sure to tune into Overtime. But before we leave, the other last thing I want to do to wrap up is I want to give you an opportunity. Perhaps it's to take a step in your relationship with Christ, or perhaps it's just to be reminded of what is true in your life. Perhaps it's just to, fix your eyes on Jesus, to fix your eyes on God. And ultimately, I want to give you an opportunity to be reminded of the foundation of your faith.
The earth is filled with your great grandeur. The stars above, they shine for you. The world below responds in wonder, God, and we're all lost in you. In all you say and do, you are worthy of your glory, God Almighty, one Lord, forever in your robes, in honor you're robed with power, God, forever you are Lord, forever. The waves resound, they pound your praises. The flowers bloom, they stretch to you. Let everything you've made now praise you, God. Let all creation sing. You are worthy of your glory, God. soul and see. And awake my soul and see. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. You are Lord forever, and hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. You are Lord forever, and you are worthy of your